This Week in Connecticut with Dennis House starts now.
Welcome to This Week in Connecticut. Greetings, everyone. I'm Dennis House. Today, we are remembering a political giant. Former U.S. Senator Joe Lieberman was laid to rest on Friday, just days after suffering a fall in his home at the age of 82. He served Connecticut as a state senator, attorney general, and U.S. senator for more than 30 years. Lieberman made history in 2000 as the Democrats' vice presidential nominee and ran for president himself 4 years later, and made history again in 2006 when he lost a primary to Ned Lamont, yet won the election in November as an independent. Today we will hear from those who knew Lieberman best. But first, we take you back to 2012 when Connecticut's then senior senator retired from the U.S. Senate. News 8's Mark Davis sat down with this trailblazer to talk about his accomplishments.
It requires reaching across the aisle and finding partners from the opposite party. It means ultimately putting the interest of country and constituents ahead of the dictates of party and ideology.
I have to believe that the highlight of your career in politics was running for vice president with Al Gore.
I look back at it, honestly, with gratitude and fondness. It was an incredible experience, a positive experience. I mean, obviously, the way it ended with the Supreme Court deciding essentially who won was disappointing, was infuriating, but, you know, life goes on.
I am a candidate for President of the United States.
Lieberman went on to run for president himself in 2004 with disastrous results, and his support for the war in Iraq further alienated him from many Connecticut Democrats. Greenwich millionaire businessman Ned Lamont challenged Lieberman in the primary in 2006 and won.
There's no question that the most difficult, I'd say hurtful moment in my political career was the night I lost the Democratic primary in 2006 to Ned Lamont.
But Lieberman had hedged his political bets, qualifying to run as an independent in November and won re-election. Despite the fact he was rejected by Democrats in Connecticut, Democrats in the U.S. Senate gave him the prestigious position of chairman of the Homeland Security Committee.
Notwithstanding the disagreement among many of my colleagues in the Democratic caucus in the Senate about what I believed about the Iraq War, we had developed working relationships. They had trust in me. The divisions in the Senate Democratic caucus were frankly never as deep as they became among Democrats here in Connecticut.
He further angered Connecticut Democrats by endorsing Republican John McCain for president in 2008, even speaking at the GOP National Convention.
John McCain was and is my dear friend. When he called me and asked me to support him in late 2007, I said, I thought about it, and I said, you know, I'm an independent. This is my friend. He's got the experience to be a great president, and I'm going to support him. And so I have no regrets.
McCain really wanted you to be his vice presidential running mate, didn't he?
John had, not only because of our relationship, our friendship, we thought a lot of the same about foreign policy and national security, but I think he understood that it was going to be a very tough race against Barack Obama, and he wanted to say to the public, maybe it's time for a bipartisan ticket. And but I think the party convinced him that if he did it, there'd be, you know, a walkout of Republican delegates at the convention and all the rest. And I would say it's for the best that I didn't have that opportunity.
Senator Joe Lieberman talking to News 8's Mark Davis. I interviewed Lieberman many times over the past 3 decades, but now I'd like to share with you some of what the senator had to say when he joined us here on This Week in Connecticut just last year.
Looking back at my years of service in Connecticut, I really gratitude to the voters in the state who gave me such great opportunities. So anyway, good to be with you, and I look forward to our discussion.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I know a lot of people across Connecticut would like to know, what have you been up to since you left the U.S. Senate?
Yeah, so, you know, sometimes my wife on a busy day will say to me, sweetheart, I thought you retired. And I said, well, I just retired from the Senate. And I didn't retire because it's not my nature. I think as long as I'm physically and mentally able, I'll stay busy. But let's say first that after the Senate, I mean, I've been busy, but nowhere near as busy as I was before. And that gives me time to be with my wife, Hadassah. And now we've been blessed with 13 grandchildren.
Wow.
And a bunch of them live in New York, which is why that was probably the hardest decision. We moved into New York to be closer to them. And, I stay busy. I'm part-time at a New York law firm. I do some teaching at a university here called Yeshiva University, one course a year. I'm involved in a bunch of nonprofit corporations that give me the chance to continue my work in areas that matter to me. A lot of them are foreign and defense policy, the John McCain Institute, quite naturally, the Center for New American Security, something called United Against Nuclear Iran. And then I've been spending a lot of time in a group called No Labels, which I helped to found a long time ago. I really wasn't active until I got out of the Senate, but we worked to try to bring back some bipartisanship to Congress and to our federal government in general. And although it's sometimes hard to see, we have made some progress, certainly at the congressional level.
And he was working on No Labels up until the time of his death. More in our coverage of the death of Senator Joe Lieberman when we come back. Tributes to Senator Lieberman have been pouring in over the past several days. From former President George W. Bush, Laura and I are saddened by the loss of Joe Lieberman. Joe was as fine an American as they come and one of the most decent people I met during my time in Washington. As a Democrat, Joe wasn't afraid to engage with senators from across the aisle and worked hard to earn votes from outside his party. He engaged in serious and thoughtful debate with opposing voices on important issues, and in both loss and victory, Joe Lieberman was always a gentleman. I'm grateful for Joe's principled service to our country and for the dignity and patriotism he brought to public life. As Laura and I pray for Hadassah and the Lieberman family, we also pray that Joe's example of decency guides our nation's leaders now and into the future. And former President Barack Obama released this statement on X saying, quote, Joe Lieberman and I didn't always see eye to eye, but he had an extraordinary career in public service, including 4 decades spent fighting for the people of Connecticut. He also worked hard to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell and helped us pass the Affordable Care Act. In both cases, the politics were difficult, but he stuck to his principles because he knew it was the right thing to do. Michelle and I extend our deepest condolences to Hadassah and the Lieberman family. And from Lieberman's running mate Al Gore, his fierce dedication to these values was clear, even as a young man when he was about to travel to the South to join the civil rights movement in the 1960s. He wrote, quote, I am going because there is much work to be done. I'm an American, and this is one nation, or it is nothing. Those are the words of a champion of civil rights and a true patriot, which is why I shared that quote when I announced Joe as my running mate. It was an honor to stand side by side with him on the campaign trail. I'll remain forever grateful for his tireless efforts to build a better future for America. And this from Governor Lamont. Annie and I send our deepest condolences to Hadassah and the Lieberman family. While the senator and I had our political differences, he was a man of integrity and conviction. So our debate about the Iraq war was serious. I believe we agreed to disagree from a position of principle. When the race was over, we stayed in touch as friends in the best traditions of American democracy. He will be missed. Of course, Lamont and Lieberman faced off in a Senate primary in 2006. Senator Chris Murphy, who replaced Lieberman in 2012, had this to say.
I think the whole state is heartbroken. This was a giant of a political figure, somebody who never fit into a political box, right, who evaluated every idea on its merits. He confounded Democrats, he confounded Republicans, but in the end, his North Star was trying to get things done that he thought were good for the country. We'd be better off if there were more people that were more open-minded to ideas like Joe Lieberman was.
Senator Richard Blumenthal, who replaced Lieberman as Attorney General, told me he was a friend of 50 years. He's also reflecting. Senator, thanks for being with us here tonight.
Thank you.
What was your reaction when you first got the news?
Shock, dismay, sadness, and a reminder of the fragility of life, Joe Lieberman was my friend for more than 50 years, and he helped to define and frame an era in our history.
Your paths were very similar. You both served in the state Senate, both became Attorney General, and then U.S. Senator. What kind of advice did he give you along the way?
Be true to yourself. Be authentic. Stand up for people. That's what he did. He was a ferocious advocate. And I think he leaves a legacy of fighting for everyday Americans, everyday people in Connecticut. And by the way, no matter how far or high he went, he never ceased working for Connecticut.
When was the last time you saw him?
I saw him about 3 weeks ago in Munich at an international security conference there. You know, he was a very strong advocate of national defense and security, homeland security, our military prowess, because he felt a strong America could help to keep the peace.
The two of you disagreed on some issues over the years, but you remained friends. How was that possible?
Well, Joe Lieberman could disagree and remain smiling. And there was no rancor or dislike in him for people who disagreed, and we disagreed, no question. But he really believed in civility, and very importantly, Dennis, he believed in bridging gaps and bringing people together. That is what he tried to do, bridging party lines, crossing the aisle, working together with Republicans, and even as an independent, and in his last term, he was elected as an independent. He worked with Democrats, but he also worked with Republicans.
How should he be remembered?
I think he should be remembered as a person who loved his family and a person of deep faith who continued to stand up and fight for people, even when he disagreed with them, and for values that he put above any particular policy, the values of our civil rights and civil liberties in this country, the values of civility and discourse, and the values of America as a nation of immigrants and of great tolerance. As the first person of Jewish faith to be nominated on a national party ticket, he broke barriers, but it showed something also very profound about the country, and he appreciated the tolerance and support that he found.
You served in the Senate with him for 2 years. When you, on day one for you, when you first showed up in the Senate, which is kind of an imposing place, let's be honest, and you were the freshman, what did he tell you?
He told me that there were a lot of rules and a lot of respect for seniority, but I should never be afraid to say what I thought, to stand up and speak out, and to fight for Connecticut.
How should he be memorialized? Should something be named after him in our state?
I will leave that to others, because at this moment, quite honestly,
early, I know.
What I'm thinking of is his family, and really kind of recalling with respect and reverence that legacy of great humanity and humility. His faith and his family kept him humble, and even when he disagreed with people, he was always ready and willing to listen to them.
As I recall, you campaigned for him in New Hampshire, correct, when he was running?
I campaigned for him when he ran for president. Yeah. Many of us did. I campaigned for him and supported him when he ran for the United States Senate the first time against Lowell Weicker. He fought and he won some uphill battles when he was first elected to the state Senate. He had to win a primary. And of course, against Lowell Weicker, he was an underdog.
It was a big deal to have someone from Connecticut on a major party ticket, wasn't it? What was the feeling like back then? I remember it being exciting for our state.
I can remember being at the Democratic convention when he was chosen by Al Gore, and it was a thrill. It was a very, very exciting, but also moving and inspiring moment, because it showed the country had moved beyond religious bias in a certain sense. And I give Al Gore and the Democratic Party a lot of credit.
When we come back, Rosa DeLauro, and I'll also share some personal thoughts. Welcome back. Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro also had a long history with Joe Lieberman and was stunned by his death. Congresswoman, what was it like when you got the news? How did you hear it?
I started to cry. I started to cry for both Stan and my husband and I. What a dear friend Joe Lieberman was. We grew up in New Haven politics together.
You did?
Yes, we did, you know. And Joe knew my mom and dad. His mom, Marcia, I knew was good friends with my mother, and you know, and just to lose such a close friend, and for me, a colleague of over 20 years. We served together. But let me go back a step, because Dennis, 34 years ago, you know, I was nominated to run for this position, and it was at the Miller Library in Hamden. It was my first nominating convention. Bob Gimo nominated me, and Joe Lieberman and Chris Dodd seconded the nomination for me. So it's just a wellspring of memories, you know, political memories and strong political friendships. You know, over the years, my husband Stan was Joe's first campaign manager. No, he worked with him on the first Senate race, and then he worked for the Gore-Lieberman, you know, ticket. And my God, how proud we were in Connecticut that Joe was running for vice president. You know, this was, you know, it was so beautiful.
And you campaigned for him.
Oh my gosh, yes, no, I did, absolutely. You know, and nothing, you know, and to be honest, Gore-Lieberman won the popular vote. You know, so that was, you know, so difficult, so hard to take. But both were such gentlemen in the loss of this race.
It was such a big deal for Connecticut to have someone on a major party ticket.
Right, yeah. No, it was, you know, it was with great pride, but understanding the depth of knowledge and, you know, who Joe, you know, knowing Joe, I served in the state Senate, he was our Attorney General, and he was in the United States Senate for all those years. He just was a giant, you know, among the people who served in the Senate, you know, really a giant, in the same way that Chris Dodd was as well.
You know, my recollection of Senator Lieberman and all my interviews with him and all my meetings with him, he seemed to be very kind. Did you see that kindness?
Oh my gosh, always very. You know, look, and Joe and I had disagreements, you know. But
there were many of them.
And we were, you know, we were good friends, we were cordial, and he was always wonderful to me, and I feel as that I was to him. Not that long ago, Stan and I dashed over. He was in Washington celebrating a birthday, and Stan and I ran over to wish him a happy birthday, which was wonderful, you know, to see him. It's a beautiful, beautiful family, you know, you know, with Hadassah and the children, etc. Wonderful.
How should he be remembered?
I think he should be remembered for his legacy as United States Senator. He was one of the first people to fight against, you know, don't ask, don't tell, and he brought that to the Senate. We worked together on a lot of legislation for Waterbury, for various towns, but his values, the legislative work that he did, and of someone who was enormously committed to the United States and understood very much so why he had been elected to the United States Senate, and understanding the power of the institution to help make a difference in people's lives. And that's what Joe Lieberman did for all the time that he served in public life. It's an honor to know him. He will be missed dearly.
What's the best piece of advice he ever gave you?
You know, at a time when I didn't have a job, or I did have a job, but I was looking for another job, and he went to bat for me with the state. And when that didn't work out, he just said to me, Rosa, don't give up. He said, there'll be another opportunity. And that other opportunity for me came when I had the opportunity to work for Senator Dodd when I managed his first campaign. It was shortly after that, as I say, where he went to bat for me, Joe went to bat for me. I couldn't get the job that we were looking at, but he said, "You don't give up," he says, and he was always there to lend a hand. And it turned out that then, you know, I had the opportunity to go to work for Senator Dodd. Congressman Dodd at the time, and then Senator Dodd.
In 2004, he ran for president on his own. What kind of president do you think he would have been?
Oh, you know, I think that the Gore Lieberman ticket was the heart of understanding the needs of the American people and how, whether you served as senators or whether you were in the position of president and vice president, that this was going to be an administration that would focus on the economic security of families in this country, what you could do to help make a difference in their lives, to give them the opportunity that only at the federal level can be afforded.
What should be named after him now in his memory? An airport, a building? Any thoughts?
You know, my
I know it's
view
early.
Whatever. You know, I'm sure that we'll be thinking about what that will be and so forth. There will be others thinking about it and so forth. But it will be enormously fitting for who he was and what difference he made in our Connecticut politics, but what difference he made nationally and internationally. A giant. We lost a giant.
We did. All right. Rosa DeLauro, thank you so much. Some final thoughts in a moment when we come back. Finally today, a few thoughts about Senator Joe Lieberman. I interviewed him countless times over my nearly 32 years as a journalist covering our state, including his first re-election campaign in 1994 when he defeated Joe Lieberman in a landslide. I traveled to Los Angeles for the 2000 Democratic Convention when Lieberman made history, and then to New Hampshire when he ran for president in 2004. Lieberman always had time to sit down for an interview and talk about politics and life, and there was never a question that he shied away from, and he was always candid and unafraid to share his opinion. He was also very kind. I covered his farewell address in Washington a dozen years ago in 2012, and he gave me this book, his book, The Gift of Rest, Discovering the Beauty of the Sabbath. It was about taking time to slow down and enjoy your loved ones. In it, he wrote, "I hope you enjoy the book and also the gift of rest. With thanks, Joe Lieberman, U.S. Senate." And I will leave you with a quick Lieberman story. After interviewing him for years, he asked me, why we always called him Senator Joseph Lieberman rather than Senator Joe Lieberman. And I answered, that's because your formal name, that's what we do. And he responded, well, you don't call President Bill Clinton William. Good point, Senator. And it was always Joe after that. Godspeed, Senator Joe Lieberman. And thanks for your service to our state and for your kindness. And thank you, all of you, for sharing your time with us for This Week in Connecticut. Up next, Tom Dudchik and the Capitol Report crew.